Good morning. Firstly, I just wanted to say that it is a great privilege and honor to be able to just sit here at the table, at the panel with Father Bernardo and Alejandra Acuña. I've shared a little bit with Alejandra on the way here, what an impact their own father had on me at the earliest time of my becoming aware of the divine will. They are the ones who really have the knowledges at a much higher level than I have. They've been kind enough to let me make comment once in a while, but they have prepared the teachings for us, and we want to listen attentively because gaining the knowledges and then imparting the knowledges to all of us is a great gift.
Muy bien, vamos a comenzar esta primera conferencia. Y quisiera comenzar con
Very well, let us begin this first conference, and I would like to start with a brief introduction about the way that we think, how we analyze
las realidades, ¿no? El pensamiento
realities.
analítico. Es decir, analizamos
Analytical thinking,
tanto la realidad
that
que nos
is,
circunda,
we analyze
que la
the
tenemos que
reality that
descomponer
surrounds
un poco
us
en partes para poder entenderla
to the point that
en su
we
totalidad.
have to break it down into parts in order
Analizar y
to
descomponer en
understand it in
partes,
its entirety.
a veces
When
podemos
analyzing
correr el
and
riesgo
breaking
de
down into parts,
perder la
we
totalidad,
sometimes run the
la
risk of
síntesis.
losing sight of the whole,
Cuando
the
analizamos, por
synthesis.
ejemplo, ¿no? Cuando estudiamos al ser humano, ¿no?
For example, when we analyze,
podemos hacer
when we
desde
study the
diferentes,
human being, man,
perspectivas.
we can approach it
Podríamos hablar
from
de
different
biología, medicina,
perspectives.
anatomía, etc.
We could
Podríamos
speak
hablar de
of
psicología, ¿no? Y es otro
biology,
ámbito
medicine,
del ser
anatomy,
humano. Y
etc.
podríamos hablar
We could speak
de
of
ética,
psychology,
de moral,
which is
podríamos
another
hablar
realm
de
of the human
espiritualidad.
being. And we could speak of ethics,
Claro
morality,
que
or
cuando
spirituality.
uno, ¿no? se centra sobre algún
Of course,
aspecto y
if we
pierde los
focus
otros aspectos,
exclusively on
las
one
áreas,
aspect
en este caso el
and
ser
lose
humano,
sight of the
podría
others,
perder de vista lo
we
que
analyze
realmente es
without
la
keeping the
totalidad del
whole
ser
in
humano.
view.
Por ejemplo, a
In this
veces
case,
cierta
the human
corriente
being could lose
científica,
sight of what really
cuando
constitutes the
quiere precisamente
entirety of
estudiar al ser
humanity.
humano, se pierde
For example,
la
sometimes
parte
certain
espiritual,
scientific
¿no?
approaches, in their
Y puede
desires
caer
to
en
study the
errores
human being,
de todo
overlook the
tipo,
spiritual
¿no? Pensando que el
dimension.
ser humano es solamente
This can lead to
biologismo
various
o
errors of all kinds,
determinismo
such as
moral,
reducing the human being to
perdiendo de
mere
vista lo que es
biologism
realmente
or moral
lo característico, que es la
determinism,
espiritualidad,
losing
¿no?
sight of what is truly
La razón, la
characteristic,
mente, el corazón,
spirituality,
el alma, ¿no?
reason, the
Bien,
mind, the heart, the soul.
a veces
Similarly,
cuando
when we
nosotros
consider
consideramos,
and
¿no? y
think
pensamos a las cosas que nosotros leemos aún en los escritos de Luisa,
about the things we
cuando
read,
nosotros pensamos, por ejemplo, ¿no? a
even
Dios,
in
a
Luisa's
Jesucristo, a la
writings, when we
iglesia,
reflect
a
on
veces
God,
la
Jesus
analizamos
Christ, or
tanto
the church,
que perdemos de
sometimes we
vista
analyze
el
we
entero,
analyze these
la
so deeply
totalidad de esa realidad.
that we lose sight of the whole,
Por lo
the
tanto, caemos
totality
o
of their
podríamos
reality.
caer en algunos errores
Therefore, we may
que
fall,
pues desde
or
el
could
inicio
fall,
podríamos
into
evitar
errors
si
that could be
consideráramos
avoided
el todo,
from the start
¿no?
if we were to
La
consider the whole.
síntesis es lo contrario del análisis. Y en realidad, si
The
nosotros
synthesis
pensamos a
is the
nivel
opposite
cristiano, a
of
nivel
analysis.
espiritual,
And in
pues nuestra
reality,
Sagrada
if we
Escritura
think
nos recuerda
at the
siempre
Christian or
esto,
spiritual level,
que
actually, sacred
nosotros
scripture
tendemos
constantly reminds
siempre
us
a
of
la
this,
unidad.
that
Y
we
la
are
unidad es
always oriented
precisamente una
toward
síntesis,
unity.
¿no? Donde todo confluye
Unity
y
is
todo tiene
precisely
una
a synthesis
explicación.
where everything converges and
La
everything
unidad, por
has
ejemplo,
an
en
explanation.
Dios. Jesús lo dice en el Evangelio de San Juan, que
Unity,
todos sean
for
uno como
example, in
nosotros somos
God,
uno, ¿no?
Jesus says in the
Esa es
Gospel
la
of St.
finalidad,
John
¿no? La
that they may
unidad.
all be one as we are
La
one.
unidad en la
That
persona de
is the
Jesús,
finality,
¿no? En su,
unity.
como
Unity
decimos
in the
en
person of
teología,
Jesus in his, what we call in theology, his hypostatic union, the divinity and the humanity. In reality, if we focus on one more than the other, or distort this reality even slightly, we could end up thinking of Jesus Christ as someone other than who he truly is. It is crucial to focus on this unity. Therefore, achieving unity is the finality of the gospel message. For example, when the church is spoken of in terms of unity, a single body, that all may be one. Likewise, when we speak of the union of man and woman, one single flesh, that they may be one flesh. This is important because when we read Luisa's writings, we must remember that sometimes Luisa takes us through a precisely analytical line of thought in order to reach unity, and we must make the effort to achieve that unity of thought, even if Luisa explains things progressively or in a way that seems to break down reality. Now, when we speak, for example, about Jesus Christ, we focus a bit on the person of Jesus, whom we well know is both God and man. He possesses a divine nature and a human nature in unity. At the Council of Chalcedon, for instance, it was specifically discussed that these two natures in Jesus are described as being the Counselor Fathers, used an expression that is very important. In Jesus Christ, there are two wills, the two natures, divine and human, united without division, without separation, without confusion, and without change, without mutation. That is to say, the unity of the divine nature and the human nature, the divine will and the human will, does not alter the identity of two wills. They remain exactly as they are, but they are united without being confused. In other words, without losing distinction, one can still recognize each, though they are fully united. It's somewhat like an example when we combine two colors, black and white, and we unite them, they turn into gray. Of course, in this case, we understand the unity of the person as gray, made up of the two elements. Although naturally, in the mixing of colors, they do blend, but in Jesus, they do not blend. Rather, we must consider this unity of person without mixture and without division. Therefore, we must always think of this unity in Jesus as such. When we speak of Jesus' acts, all of Jesus' acts are carried out and lived in the unity of his two wills, the human will and the divine will, without any opposition, without separation. This is fundamental because if at any moment we were to think that in the life of Jesus, his divinity was never separated from his humanity, then we would be destroying the person of Jesus. For example, Some might think, and some have done so, believing that at the moment Jesus died on the cross, when he used the expression, my God, why have you forsaken me? Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani. They say, surely his divinity separated from his humanity because he could not suffer, could not endure suffering. That is absurd. His divinity never separated from his humanity. Therefore, all the acts performed by Jesus are human and both human and divine. This is expressed with a theological term, theandric. This is important because otherwise we truly destroy what constitutes the person of Jesus, the unity of his person. This is why there is a very important chapter in Luisa's writings, volume 16, August 13th, 1923. It says, my humanity, which never separated from my divinity, it formed in that humanity, united to the divinity, it formed the great plan of the human will in the divine will, the plan of God, the design of God, the mystery of God. What is precisely revealed to humanity is the mystery that is now certainly revealed to us and made known, but it is the plan of God with my human will united to the divine. There was no human act which I did not place in relation with the supreme volition, precisely because of that union and the never-ending separation of the two wills. All the acts we might think of in Jesus as human were made divine, precisely because of the union of the two wills. With the divine will, he knew all the acts of all generations. We, in our analysis, we could think, as a man, as a human being, how would it be possible to know all the acts of all creatures? We ourselves do not experience that. We cannot know everything. God, however, does. Thus, with the divine will, he knew all the acts of all generations. With the human will, he sought to repair and bound all things to the eternal volition. Certainly, we could think in this way to understand the unity of Jesus' acts. This is how Luisa expresses herself to help us grasp something far more important, the unity of the acts themselves in Jesus. There was not one act which could escape me, and which was not ordered by me. In the most pure light of the supreme will, everything that Jesus assumed was sanctified. The fathers of the church said, everything that Jesus lived was done in his most holy will. In his will, there is no other way. I could say that redemption cost me little. My external life, the pains of my passion, my examples, my word, would have been sufficient. I would have done it quickly. But in order to form the great plan of the human will in the divine, to bind all the relations and links which had been broken by it, I had to place my whole interior, my whole
bastante
hidden
más
life,
numerosas
all
y
my
más
intimate
intensas que
pains,
mis penas externas,
which
y
are
que
far
aún no
more
son
numerous and
conocidas,
more
¿no?
intense than my external
Pues
pains, and which are not yet known.
nosotros muchas veces
We
pensamos y
often
reflexionamos, meditamos
we
en la
often
vida
think,
de Jesús, lo que
reflect,
ciertamente los
and meditate
evangelios, la
on the
tradición
life of
nos
Jesus,
han
focusing
hecho
on
llegar
what the
hasta
Gospels
nosotros,
and
¿no?
tradition
Y vemos sobre todo pues,
have
todo lo
passed down
que
to us.
Jesús hizo
We
y como
mostly
cuentan los
consider
evangelios, son
all
sobre
that
todo
Jesus
cosas
did
exteriores, ¿no?
as the Gospels
Visibles,
recount,
que se
and these
pueden
are
ver y palpar,
primarily
¿no?
external and visible
La vida
acts,
interior de
things
Jesús no es
that
tan
can be
visible,
seen
¿eh?
and narrated.
No,
The
si él
interior
no
life
lo
of
hace
Jesus,
saber, pues no
however, is not
podríamos
visible.
verlo. Como nosotros no
If he
vemos la
does not
vida
reveal it
interior
to
de una
us,
persona, no conocemos los pensamientos, no
we would be
conocemos
unable to perceive it. Just as we
los
cannot see the
el
interior
querer
life of a
de la
person, we
persona,
cannot
no
know their
conocemos la vida
thoughts, their
interior
acts of
de las
will,
personas si no nos lo
or
hacen
their inner
saber.
life, unless they
Jesús, pues,
make it known to us.
nos dice eso.
Jesus tells us
El mundo de su vida interior no fue
that
muy
much of his
contado en el
interior life
Evangelio, ¿no? Pero todo
was not
lo que fue
recounted
hecho en
in
la
the
voluntad
Gospels.
humana y divina
However, everything
fue realmente
he did in both his
redimido,
human and divine
santificado
will
y
was
hecho
truly redeemed,
precisamente en su divina voluntad.
sanctified,
¿Mm?
and done precisely in
Basta
his divine
decir que
will.
no era el solo perdón lo que impetraba, la remisión de las
It is
culpas, el
enough to
refugio, la
say
salvación,
that it
la
was not
defensa de los
just
graves
forgiveness,
peligros de la vida del
that I
hombre,
impetrated, remission
en
of
pasión,
sins, refuge,
sino que
escape,
era el
defense in the great
resurgimiento de
dangers of the
todo
life of
su
man,
interior.
as I did in my passion,
¿Qué quiere decir
but it
este
was the new
resurgimiento
rising
de
of the
todo su
whole interior
interior?
of man.
Pues precisamente todo lo
What
que,
does
toda la
this
vida
new
de
rising
Jesús,
of the
que para
whole
nosotros
interior of man mean?
puede ser
It is
escondida, pero
precisely everything that the
realmente
whole life of
ya
Jesus,
vivió,
which for us may
y
seem
en la
hidden,
cual
but has truly
podemos
already been
encontrar
lived, and in it
toda la vida de todas
we
las
can find
criaturas,
all the life
rehecha,
of all
redimida,
creatures,
santificada.
remade, redeemed,
Yo debía hacer surgir ese sol del
sanctified.
querer divino, que
I
atando
had
con
to make
fuerza
that Son of the
atrayente
eternal will
todo el
rise,
interior del hombre,
which
abre las
binding
más
his whole
íntimas fibras
interior with a
de todo lo
rapturing
que
power,
nosotros
even his
vivimos,
most
¿no?
intimate fibers,
Interiormente,
everything that
lo
we live,
podríamos encontrar allí,
both
unido
externally and
a los actos
internally,
de Jesús.
could be found
¿Por qué?
there,
Porque Él
united
precisamente no fue
to the
solo
acts of
hombre, sino
Jesus.
también Dios.
Why?
No fue
Because he
solamente
was not
voluntad
only a
humana,
man,
sino
but
voluntad divina.
also
Y
God.
por eso
He was not merely
encontramos
human.
allí todos nuestros
It
actos
was not
y
merely human
podremos
will, but divine
recibir
will.
todos
And for
los
this reason,
bienes
we find all
de
our
los
acts
actos de
there
Jesús.
and are able to receive
Yo debía
all
hacer
the
surgir
goods
ese sol
from
del
the
querer
acts
divino que
of
atando con
Jesus.
fuerza atrayente todo el
I
interior
had
del
to make
hombre,
that
aun
Son
las
of the
fibras más
eternal
íntimas,
will rise,
debía
which,
conducirlo al
binding his
seno
whole
de mi Padre
interior with
celestial
enrapturing
como
power,
renacido
even
en
his
su
most intimate
eterno
fibers,
querer.
was to lead him into the
Y si
womb
no
of my
hubiera hecho
celestial
esto,
Father,
la
as though
redención no
reborn in
habría
his
sido
eternal
completa,
will.
ni habría sido obra digna de un Dios, y no habría ajustado ni ordenado todas las
And
partes del
had I not
hombre,
done this,
ni habría
the
restituido aquella
redemption
santidad
would
perdida
not have
al
been
haberse
complete,
sustraído de la divina voluntad
nor a work
y
worthy
haber roto las
of a
relaciones
God.
con ella.
I would have neither
En
balanced
realidad,
nor ordered all that counts of
otra
man,
idea
nor would
que
have
nos
I
hace
restored in
entender
him that sanctity
en
which he lost by
este
withdrawing from
capítulo
the divine
es
will,
que
and by breaking his
Jesús
relations with it.
rehizo
In
todos los
reality,
actos de todas las
another
criaturas.
idea
Quiere decir que
that this
rehizo
chapter helps us
interiormente a cada uno de nosotros para
understand
que nosotros
is that
podamos vivir
Jesus
de
redid
modo
all the acts of
equilibrado,
every creature.
de
This
modo
means that he
perfecto,
redid
¿no?
each one of us so that we
En nuestra vida interior,
could live
¿no?
in
El
a balanced
desorden lo
and perfect
trajo el
way
pecado. El pecado desordenó
in our
la
interior
vida
life.
interior y exterior
Sin
como
brought disorder.
consecuencia de los seres humanos,
As a
¿no?
consequence, sin
En
disordered
cambio,
the interior life and exterior life of
Jesús con su
human
vida
beings.
pudo
However,
rehacer todo y nos dio la
Jesus, through
posibilidad
his life,
de vivir en
was
perfecto equilibrio.
able to redo everything and give us the possibility to live in perfect balance, precisely in the unity, in the synthesis
Ora, hay otro
of our will
capítulo que nos
with the
puede
will of
ayudar
God.
en esta reflexión.
Now,
Del volumen 19,
there is another chapter
28 de
that can
marzo
help us in
de
this reflection
1926.
from volume
Dice,
19,
hija mía, la
March
finalidad
28th,
primera, la finalidad primaria de
1926.
todo lo que hizo
It says,
mi mamá
"My
y de
daughter,
todo lo que hice yo
the
en la
primary
redención
purpose
fue que mi fiat reinase en la tierra.
of all that my mama
No habría
did
sido ni
and all that
decoroso,
I
ni
did in
verdadero amor, ni
redemption was that my fiat would
magnanimidad
reign upon
grande,
earth.
ni mucho menos
It
obrar
would not
como
have
el
been
Dios que era,
decorous,
si
nor a
viniendo al
true
mundo hubiera
love,
debido y querido dar a las
nor a
criaturas
great
solo la cosa
magnanimity,
más
and even less
pequeña,
an operating
como son
worthy
los
of the
medios para
God that I
salvarse,
was,
y no la
if in
cosa más
coming into the
grande,
world
como
I
es
had
mi
given and wanted
voluntad,
to give to
la
creatures the
cual
smaller thing,
contiene
which
no
was the
solo los
means to be
remedios, sino
saved,
todos los
but
bienes
not the
posibles
greater
que hay en
one,
el cielo
which
y
was
en la
my
tierra.
will, which
Y no
contains
solo la
not
salvación y
only
la
the
santidad,
remedies,
sino esa
but all
santidad
possible
que
goods
la
that
eleva
exist
a
in
la misma
heaven and on
santidad
earth.
de su creador.
And not only
Ahora,
salvation and
ciertamente,
sanctity,
cuando
but that
nosotros
sanctity
hablamos
which
de
raises them to
redención,
the very sanctity of their
es un
Creator.
concepto, una idea
Certainly now, when
que
we
proviene
speak
ya desde el Antiguo
of
Testamento.
redemption,
La redención
it is a concept,
significa,
an idea that comes
la
from the
redención
Old
significa
Testament.
liberar al
Redemption means
pariente
freeing
más
the
próximo,
closest
liberarlo de la
relatives,
esclavitud
freeing them
y hacerlo vivir en
from
la
slavery,
libertad.
and making them live in
Ahora,
freedom.
esta idea que nosotros vemos muy bien, por
Now,
ejemplo, en el
this
libro de
idea,
Ruth,
which we see
es
very clearly, for
precisamente la
example, in the
idea
book
de la
of Ruth,
redención de Jesús.
is precisely the
Vino
concept of
en este
redemption.
mundo
Jesus
para
came
liberar a los parientes más
into this
próximos, que
world
somos
to
los seres humanos.
free the
Por
closest
eso,
relatives,
Él
which
se
are us,
encargó,
human beings.
asumió una
That is why
naturaleza
he
humana
incarnated,
para poder
assuming a human
redimirnos como
nature,
parientes
to
más
redeem us
próximos,
as
¿no?
the closest
Y
relatives, and to free
para
us,
poder liberarnos, para poder
and to
salvarnos
free us,
precisamente, ¿no?
to save
Liberarnos
us,
quiere decir
precisely.
quitar
To free
nuestras
us
esclavitudes, la
means
esclavitud
to remove our
ciertamente del
enslavements,
pecado,
the
y
slavery
hacernos
of
vivir en
sin,
la libertad.
and to make us
Ahora,
live in freedom.
no es solamente
Now,
quitarnos
it is
nuestra
not only
esclavitud,
freeing
la esclavitud
us
del pecado,
from slavery,
sino
the
también
slavery of sin, but
enseñarnos a vivir
also
en la total libertad, la
about
libertad del
teaching us
espíritu,
to live in
¿no?
total
Y
freedom,
la libertad del
the freedom of the
espíritu es
Spirit.
precisamente la
And the
unión
freedom of
de
the
la
Spirit
voluntad
is
del
precisely
hombre
the
con la
union
voluntad de
of the
Dios.
human will with the will of
Por
God.
eso, lo que Jesús
That is why
hizo, la
what
obra
Jesus
de la
accomplished,
salvación de la redención,
the
no
work
es
of
solamente
salvation, of
una
redemption, is not
obra
merely
que podríamos decir
a
de
work
perdón de los pecados,
that we
sino es de
could describe as
santificación
one of
y
forgiveness of sins,
santificación
but it is
plena.
one of
Claro que
sanctification
para esto se
and fullness
llegará
of sanctification. Of course,
poco a
for this to
poco,
happen,
dependiendo
it will
el
take
tiempo,
time,
dependiendo
depending
la
on time
capacidad
and depending on the
de cada
capacity
persona, ¿no?
of each
Y la
person
comprensión de este
and their
misterio de la
understanding
redención, que se verifica
of
en
this
cada uno
mystery
de
of the
nosotros.
redemption, which
Ahora,
unfolds in each of us. Now,
ciertamente nosotros tenemos que, por
certainly,
lo pronto,
we
entender
must first
realmente lo que significa la
truly
redención.
understand
Y hemos ya tenido bastantes
what
siglos para
redemption
entenderlo,
means,
porque
and
desde
we have
que,
already had many
sobre todo,
centuries
Jesús llevó a cumplimiento
to
su obra,
comprehend it, because ever since
la
Jesus
obra
fulfilled
de
his
Dios, el
work,
diseño de Dios para la
the
humanidad,
work of God,
con su vida,
the plan of
pasión
God
y
for humanity
resurrección,
through
¿no?
his life,
Desde ahí
passion,
hasta ahora
death,
se ha
and
hablado
resurrection,
mucho y se
much
ha
has been said,
profundizado en lo que es precisamente
much
la
has been
redención,
said
¿no?
and explored
Ahora tenemos que
about what
seguir
redemption
adelante
is. Now, we must move
como
forward
iglesia precisamente y entender aún
as a
más
church
el
and
sentido
continue
de
to
la
deepen our
santificación
understanding of
plena.
the meaning of the fullness of
Pues
sanctification.
estos dos aspectos son
These
fundamentales. Claro,
These two
Luisa
aspects are
usa decir la
fundamental.
finalidad
Of
primera, la
course,
finalidad,
Luisa
pero
often speaks of
volvemos
the
al punto del
primary
inicio.
purpose,
Es
the
una
ultimate
unidad
goal,
de la obra de
but
Dios.
we
No es que
return to
sean
the
dos
starting
cosas
point. It is a
separadas o
unity in the
distintas,
work of
es lo mismo.
God. It is not that there
Es
are
una
two
misma
separate or
obra
different
que
things.
es al
It
mismo
is the same
tiempo
work, which
de
at the same
liberación
time
y de
is one of
santificación
freedom
plena.
and the fullness of sanctification.
Sí, entonces, esta obra de redención, Jesús la hizo,
Yes,
como ya
this
se
work
vio,
of
con
redemption
pureza,
is what Jesus
pero
did in its fullness.
no la manifestó completa.
But
Por lo mismo que la
he
humanidad
did
está
not
equivocada,
reveal it fully
porque continúa diciendo el mismo
because
versículo.
humanity was not ready.
Mi bondad,
This is what he
a
continues to
pesar de
explain
que
in
la
this chapter.
finalidad primaria era
My
equidad,
goodness.
mi
In other
bondad
words,
debió
while the
bajar
primary
a la
purpose
finalidad
was the
secundaria.
fiat,
O
my
sea, la primera
goodness had
parte
to descend
de esa
to the
misma
secondary purpose.
unidad de
In other
obra.
words, the first
Para
part
ser como un
of that
maestro
same
que
unity
mientras posee las ciencias
and
más
act almost like a
altas
teacher
y pudiendo dar las
who, through
lecciones más
possessing
nobles y sublimes,
the highest sciences
dignas de sí
and being
mismo,
able to give noble and
como
sublime
sus
lessons
alumnos son todos
worthy of himself,
analfabetos, se debe
since his
adaptar
students
a
are
dar
all
lecciones
illiterate,
de ABC
has to lower himself
para poder
to
llegar
giving
poco a
lessons
poco a su
in
finalidad primaria,
ABCs,
finalidad
to
completa,
then be able to
que es
reach
la de
little
dar
by little his
lecciones
primary purpose
de
of
las ciencias
imparting
que posee
the
para ser
lessons
otros
in the
maestros
science
dignos
he
de ese
possesses,
maestro.
to make of
Jesús
them
el
as many
maestro
teachers worthy
no
of such a
hubiera
teacher.
querido abajarse
If
a
this
dar
teacher
lecciones de estudios
did not want
inferiores,
to lower
si hubiera
himself
querido dar lecciones
to
de
giving
semejante
lessons
ciencia,
in inferior
los
studies
alumnos
and wanted to
analfabetas
give
no le
lessons
habrían
in his high
entendido
science,
y
the
con la
students,
fe y con
being
tanta
illiterate,
ciencia
would not understand
ignorada por
him,
ellos, lo
and confused
abandonaron
by such a great
y el
science,
pobre
which they
maestro,
ignored,
por no haberse
would
querido
leave him,
bajar, no habría
and the
podido
poor
dar ni
teacher,
el bien
by
pequeño de
not
su
wanting to
ciencia,
lower
ni
himself,
menos el grande.
would give neither the small good
Bueno, ese es el ejemplo. Ahora
nor
lo
the
vamos a
great
aplicar a
good
la
of his
humanidad.
science.
Ahora, hija mía,
That
cuando
was
yo
the
vine a la
example.
tierra,
Now he will apply
las
it to
criaturas
humanity.
eran todas
Now, my
analfabetas,
daughter,
cosas
when I came
necesarias.
upon earth, creatures were all
Recordemos que
illiterate
muchísimas cosas
in the
no nos
things of
sabían.
heaven.
Nosotros estamos acostumbrados
Let us remember
pensar
that
que ya
many
sabíamos
things
al
they
menos el
simply did not
catecismo.
know. We are
Bueno,
used to
si se le
thinking
enseña bien el catecismo
that we
a
at
un
least
niño
study
de
the
18 años,
catechism.
saben
If a
mucho
7 or
más
8-year-old child is
que
well
las
taught the
personas que
catechism,
creemos a Jesús.
they know much
Lo
more
que no sabían, por
than the
ejemplo, con
people
claridad
of Jesus'
el misterio
time.
de la Santísima Trinidad
Remember, for example,
y tantas
that they did
cosas
not
del
clearly
alma.
understand the mystery of the Most Holy Trinity,
En fin, entonces,
or
ya
many
que
other
ella era
things that they
analfabeta
did
de
not
las cosas
understand
del
about the
cielo,
soul.
y
So
si yo
they
hubiera
were
querido
really
hablar del
illiterate
fiat
about the things of heaven.
y del verdadero vivir
If
en
I had
él,
wanted to
hubieran sido
speak
incapaces
about
de
the fiat
comprender.
and the
Si
true
no
living in
conocían
it,
el
they
camino
would
para
have been
venir a mí,
incapable of
y la
comprehending,
mayor parte
since they
eran
did not know
cojos,
the way to come
ciegos,
to me,
enfermos,
the majority of them being
se
crippled,
está refiriéndose por
blind,
el alma.
sick.
Debía bajarme en los
He is
medios de
referring above
humanidad
all to the
que
soul.
cubría a aquel fiat que quería dar.
I had to lower myself
Debía
within the
bajarme
guise
con
of my
ellos,
humanity, which
ponerme
covered
común
that
con
fiat,
todos
which I
para
wanted to
poder
give,
enseñar
becoming their
los
brother,
primeros rudimentos,
associating with
las
everyone to
primeras
be able
lecciones, el
to
ABC
teach the
del
first
fiat supremo.
rudiments,
Y viene siendo lo mismo
the
de la unidad, o sea,
ABCs of the
todo lo que
supreme
Jesús nos
fiat.
enseña
It is the same as the unity of all things. Everything Jesus teaches us is not separate from the divine will. It is part of it and must be learned in order to eventually arrive at the divine will. These are the basic truths. And everything I taught, did, and suffered was nothing but preparing the way, the kingdom and dominion of my will. This is the usual way of our works, to do minor things as preparatory act for greater things. In reality, our Lord also wanted us to understand what the greater thing was. He did not keep it hidden. He came not only to carry out all this work and leave it within himself, waiting for the time when he could manifest it, but he also left us certain teachings to understand where it was all leading. If we analyze Jesus's teachings in the gospel, he speaks about many aspects, but always places the will of the Father above all else. Behold, O God, I come to do your will. For example, another quote from St. John, the Son cannot do anything by himself, but only what he sees the Father do. For whatever the Father does, the Son does likewise. In the same way, I have not come down from heaven to do my own will, but to do the will of my Father who sent me. In this way, he places the will of the Father above all, and in all his acts, he places the Father in first place. I do not seek my own will, but the will of the Father. And he goes even further. I have a food that you do not know. My food is to do the will of the one who sent me. So not only does he place the will of the Father in first place, but he also makes it his continuous nourishment. That is something he is constantly feeding on in his life and his acts. Another quote, whoever does the will of my Father is my mother and my brothers. Thus, those closest to him are those who do the will of the Father. You can see how he always gives the will of the Father the first place. Even more, he says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. This also helps us understand that the most important thing and what must have first place in our lives is the divine will. He does not yet teach the great lessons about how the divine operates, but he already begins to guide us toward it, toward the divine will for us and the entire church. Even more so, let us remember Jesus's words in the garden, not my will, but yours be done. In that moment of such great bitterness, he once again places the Father's will in the first place. And there is yet another quote. You will recall it from the Our Father. I'm going to read from volume 23, February 5th, 1928. My daughter, as Adam sinned, God made him the promise of the future Redeemer. Centuries passed, but the promise did not fail, and the generations had the good of redemption. Now, as I came from heaven and formed the kingdom of redemption, before departing for heaven, I made another promise, more solemn, of the kingdom of my will. Thus, he teaches us that the will of the Father is the most important thing and must come first place, something we must recognize and apply in all our acts. But he also promises us the kingdom of the divine will, the fullness of that redemption. And this promise was given in the Our Father. And so, as to give it more value and to obtain it more quickly, I made this formal promise in the solemnity of my prayer, praying the Father to let his kingdom come, which is the divine will on earth as it is in heaven. I place my very self as the head of that prayer, knowing that such was his will, and that, prayed by me, he would deny me nothing. More so, since I prayed with his very will, and I asked for something which was wanted by my Father himself. He leaves us a promise, just as he gave Adam the promise of redemption, and throughout the Old Testament, the patriarchs, prophets, the chosen people lived with this certainty that the Redeemer would come. And through this, they were saved and sanctified. To us, before going to heaven, he made this promise, saying that it is even more solemn. Thus, the church holds this promise of Jesus, which is both a promise and a petition. That is, it is something that, and that at the same time, it can also be considered a prophecy if we wish to see it in that way. That is, it is something that will be fulfilled. The church, if we analyze it, has lived in this. Let us continue with what it says here. And after I had formed this prayer before my celestial Father, certain that the kingdom of my divine will upon earth would be granted to me, I taught it to my apostles, that they might teach it to the whole world, so that one might be the cry of all. Your will be done on earth as it is on heaven, so that all would ask for it and desire it, and thus it would be fulfilled. A promise more sure and solemn I could not make. Centuries are like one single point for us, but our words are accomplished acts and facts. My very praying, let it come, let your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, meant that with my coming upon earth, the kingdom of my will was not established in the midst of creatures. Otherwise, I would have said, my Father, let our kingdom, which I have already established on earth, be confirmed, or let our will dominate and reign. Instead, I said, let it come. This meant that it must come, and creatures must await it with that certainty with which they awaited the future Redeemer.
Se habla de esperanza, ¿no? Esperanza como
Hope,
certeza que
hope as
la
the
promesa de Dios se
certainty
cumplirá.
that God's
Para la
promise
esperanza de los
will be
patriarcas, los
fulfilled, the hope
profetas, todos los
of
que
the
vivieron
patriarchs, the
en la época
prophets,
anterior a
and all
Jesús.
those who lived
Ve,
before
para
Jesus
nosotros la
was
esperanza
a
del reino
forward-looking
es
hope.
que ciertamente
For
ese
us,
reino
the
de la
hope
voluntad de
of the
Dios, de la
kingdom
voluntad
is
divina,
that this
se
kingdom of the will of
manifestará
God, the divine will,
no en un
will
futuro
certainly
en el cual
manifest itself,
estamos
not
esperando así, sin, no,
as a
sino la
distant
certeza de que
future.
ya
We are
está.
waiting for
¿Por qué?
passively,
Porque
but with the
ya está en la
certainty
iglesia.
that it is already
Es más,
present.
es la misma obra
Why?
de redención que Jesús
Because
hizo.
it is
Por lo
already within the
tanto,
church.
pues
In
es
fact, it is the
importante
same work of redemption
tener
that
bien
Jesus accomplished.
claro eso,
Therefore, it
que
is important to
la obra de
have
Dios,
clarity
el
that this
diseño de
work of
Dios para la
God,
humanidad,
the
es uno
plan of
solo.
God for
No
humanity,
son,
is
no son
one
dos.
single work.
La
It is
espiritualidad
not
de la divina
two
voluntad
separate
no es
things. The
otra cosa
spirituality of the
diferente,
divine will
separada,
is not something
o
different,
otro
separate,
camino
or
nuevo,
a
único,
new, unique
que
path
quién
that
sabe
emerged
de
from
dónde
who
surgió.
knows
No,
where.
es la
It
misma
is the
obra de
same
Dios
work of
que
God,
ahora pues se ha
which
manifestado
is
para que
now
podamos
being revealed
profundizar mucho
so
más
that we
en lo
can
que es
deepen much
precisamente
more
nuestro
in what
ser
truly means
hijos de
to be
Dios,
children
como
of God.
cristianos, como
As Christians,
creados precisamente por Dios para
created
vivir en la
precisely by
unidad
God
de nuestra
to live
voluntad
in
con la
unity
voluntad divina.
between our
Por
will and the
eso,
divine will.
ahora vamos a tener
For
un
this
momento de
reason,
reflexión
we will now
personal.
have a moment of
Podríamos,
personal
si
reflection.
quieren, se pueden juntar en pequeños
If you'd like, you
grupos
can
para
gather in small groups
dialogar,
to
pensar,
dialogue,
meditar,
think,
reflexionar.
meditate,
Em,
and reflect,
Pensando justo en esto, en todo lo que hemos dicho,
considering everything we have
y sobre todo
discussed,
en esto,
and
cuánto
especially
realmente
reflecting on this.
nosotros
How much
estamos
are we
seguros,
truly
¿no? Estamos
certain,
ciertos, tenemos esa
confident,
esperanza
and
vivida ya
living
hoy,
with that hope today
que
that the
el
kingdom
reino está
is already
presente, no será solamente una cuestión del
present?
futuro, será
It won't
pleno
only be a matter of
en
the
el
future,
futuro
it will
último,
reach its
pero
fullness
ya ahora lo
in the
vivimos.
ultimate future.
¿Cuánto nosotros
But we
estamos
are already living it
convencidos que
now.
la obra
How
de Dios
convinced
es
are we that God's
única,
work is
no es
unique,
diferente o separada una
not
cosa de
different
otra?
or separate,
De ahí
one thing
quise
from
iniciar.
other?
No podemos
That's why
separar las
I wanted
cosas
to
para
start here.
analizarlas perdiendo
We
de
cannot
vista
analyze
la obra
things while
completa.
losing
Es
sight of the
un
complete
diseño de
work.
Dios, una obra
It is a
única
design of
para la
God, a
humanidad,
unique work
desde
for
el inicio
humanity, from
hasta
the
el fin.
beginning to the end.
Vamos a tener tiempo para la
So
meditación
let's take time
personal.
for personal meditation.